Okay, I think we're starting. So, hello everybody watching. Good evening from us in DiEM25. This is another Beyond the Balcony series call. The series in which DiEM25's coordinating collective speaks with our grassroots organizers around Europe and beyond. In today's call, we will be talking to our friends and comrades from Benelux. That is Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Thank you all very much for being here with us. We have national collectives in Belgium and the Netherlands as well. And from Luxembourg, we are joined by some of our grassroots coordinators of our local groups there. So again, thank you very much for being with us. Belgium, particularly now, I must say, it has been home away from home. It's been an adopted country, if you like, for a few years. So it's a call especially close to my heart. Belgium also has a particularity when it comes to our pan-European project, which is that it is, when it comes to Brussels, it contains the capital of both the nation of Belgium, but also the heart of the beast, that is the European Union. And that has, for the past few years, meant a certain bipolar character to the movement in Belgium, particularly having to coordinate both of those aspects of our activity, both vis-a-vis the institutions, which are based here in Belgium, but also towards the country, making sure that we still remain a relevant political voice to Belgians. So that is a particularly interesting topic for me, especially, and I hope that we will touch upon it today. However, before we give the floor to our organizers from all of these countries, we'll start with a brief introduction from Yanis, who is also here with us. And after that, the floor will go to our coordinators. So, Yanis.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone. It's very good to see all of you. Some of you are, well, you've been part and parcel of DiEM25 from day one, actually day -1, I should say. So it's always good to see you, comrades. Since you are early adopters of DiEM25's agenda, the last thing you need is for me to tell you that, we were right. The European Union is disintegrating as a result of its lack of democratic process, and as a result of an intergovernmental structure, which is promoting all those things that create crisis of the majority, and the failures of handling rationally those crises, and instead of a rational approach to those crises, a rational management of the crisis, what you have is policies that cost a huge amount of money, but money that is spent on the oligarchy, on those who, in fact, created the crisis, not in the case of coronavirus, but in the case of the Euro crisis at least. And very little goes to mend the foundations whose brittle nature is the root cause of what Europe is facing. Now, let me get one thing out of the way. There is no doubt that the coronavirus has strengthened and multiplied the imbalances within the EU. Countries like Italy, that were already with one foot outside the Eurozone before the coronavirus hit, are now effectively lost in spiritual terms, in economic terms, in political and economic terms to the European Union. A very large majority of Italians want nothing to do with the EU. That is a spectacular failure of the EU, given that the vast majority of Italians, until a few years ago, were staunch proponents of the EU. If you look at every dimension, whether it's economics or social issues, the imbalances between our countries and different polities are getting worse and worse and worse. You have countries at the moment moving beyond, party politics and disagreements with other political forces. There are some facts that are beyond dispute. Countries with many more small businesses are the ones that can never be helped by this mix of policies from the European Union. Why? Because the policies that come from the Commission were always tailor-made for large companies. So countries that have many small companies are not going to benefit from these packages, whether they are packages from the European Investment Bank, from the recovery fund that Merkel and Macron are talking about, and so on. And which are these countries? Italy, Greece, Spain, and to a large extent, France. So the countries that have been hit the worst by the medical emergency, by the pandemic, right, are the ones that suffer the most because of tourism, over-reliance on tourism. Take Italy, Spain, and Greece, for instance. And the ones that will be the least helped by the Commission's packages, while at the very same time have the smallest fiscal capacity to actually mind their own shop, their own society. So you can see that the centrifugal forces pulling Europe apart are getting much, much stronger. And there's nothing that is being done at the political level. Every Eurogroup meeting is a spectacular failure. Every European Union summit is an attempt to present a complete disaster as a minor triumph. Every time they meet together, they come out with great pronouncements about trillions here and billions there. But then, you know, the more closely you look at these numbers, the more of a disappearing act they perform. Suddenly you realize it's hot air. There's no real money there. Recently, 2 or 3 days ago, the media celebrated an agreement between Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron. It sounded like a breakthrough. And it was, of course, presented as a breakthrough. But some of us, those who have been working for DiEM and with DiEM, we know better, because we've seen this all before. Remember back in 2015 when the Greek people were defeated by the Troika. Very soon after that, there were all these pronouncements that that should never happen again, and that there would be a different approach to solidarity in Europe, especially when the Portuguese elected a progressive anti-austerity government, which in the end simply did as it was told by the Troika. You remember in June 2018, when in the beautiful state of Brandenburg, Merkel and Macron met again to make a triumphant announcement. And their announcement, do you remember that announcement? They announced that the Eurozone is going to become something like a fiscal union. They announced a common budget for the Eurozone. Does anybody have a memory of that? If you don't, let me tell you that back in June 2018, that was big news. Front page of the Financial Times, in every serious broadsheet newspaper, that the Eurozone is federating. Macron got his way, and now we're going to have a common budget. What happened to this common budget? It fizzled out. It was meant to be 4% of the euro area total income. It shrunk from 3-4% to 1%. It ended up being 0.01%. In other words, it did a disappearing act and was embedded into a small, tiny little section somewhere in the European Union budget. In other words, went away. Something similar, I'm afraid, is going to happen with this Merkel-Macron plan. But it's important to see how the European Union spectacularly fails while the propaganda is still one of triumph. You'll remember that 11 prime ministers and presidents supported the Eurobond. Now, the idea of the Eurobond is what? The idea of the Eurobond is that the European Union borrows as the European Union. Because you see, what some people forget, many people forget, is that Belgium has its debt, Greece has its debt, Germany has its debt. The European Union has no debt. So Europe has no debt as Europe, as a union. Our countries have debt. The idea of the Eurobond is to shift some of the debt from the member states, whose shoulders are very weak, onto the broad shoulders of Europe, which has no debt. And that is not an attempt to add debt to debt. This is what we're doing now. Because, you know, when Belgium or Greece or Holland or Italy use the treasury of their government in order to, you know, pay for unemployment benefits during this coronavirus increase in unemployment, or to, you know, give some money to companies so that they don't shut down, that is added onto the national debt of Belgium, Holland, Italy, Greece, and so on. Yeah. But the Eurobond, what it would do, it would ensure that the new debt, which is necessary in order to fight the economic pandemic, the new debt would go to the European level. And because Europe is large, rich, and has no debt, it could borrow at much lower interest rates than Belgium, Greece, Italy, indeed Germany can. So it wouldn't be just adding debt on debt. It would be creating new debt, but so that the total debt of all Europeans shrinks, because a large part of it, the European level part of debt, would come at a negative interest rate, a very low interest rate, so the total amount of debt would shrink. That would be the beauty of the Eurobond. So this was discussed extensively recently. It was put forward by Macron, by Sanchez, the Spanish Prime Minister, Conte, the Italian Prime Minister, the Greek Prime Minister, 11 Prime Ministers and Presidents. I'm not sure whether the Belgian one supported it. Maybe he did. And nothing happened with it. Why? Because the Dutch Finance Minister and the German Finance Minister vetoed it, and the others buckled. Now what they're saying is that this agreement by Merkel and Macron is a substitute for the Eurobond. It isn't. It is true. This is the typical story of Europe. They're doing something that looks like a Eurobond, but isn't. What they've done is they've agreed that there will be an increase in the guarantees that our member states give to the European Commission. So Greece, Belgium, Luxembourg, Holland, and so on are going to give a guarantee, no money, a guarantee to the Commission so the Commission can borrow on behalf of the European Union. So that is, in a sense, it sounds like a Eurobond because it is a collective debt, right? But the guarantees come from member states. So it is a bit like, imagine if in the United States, Arizona, Missouri, California, New York State were to use their own budgets to fund the American government. It would be a disaster. It would be common debt of a sort. There's no doubt about that. But it would be a complete catastrophe because Missouri cannot guarantee anybody's debt. It's bankrupt, like Italy is bankrupt or Greece is bankrupt. You know, what the Fed does, sorry, what the federal government does in the United States is the government has its own sources of revenue. There are federal taxes. The state have their own. And also, very importantly, based on the federal taxes, the federal government can issue its own bonds in the marketplace, which the Chinese buy. So even though the United States has a trade deficit overall, the Chinese buy the federal government's bonds because they have nowhere else to put their dollars. And that's what makes America strong. We don't have a Eurobond. What we have is, you know, our little Missouris and Arizonas supporting the debt of Brussels, okay? So that is the most toxic form of debt. You know, we shouldn't be doing this at all. You know, some people say to me, some comrades from DiEM as well, they say, but Yanis, look, isn't that a good first move? Okay, it's not going far enough, but isn't it a good first move towards neutralizing debt? And then, you know, we can be critical of the fact that they moved in the right direction, but they didn't take enough steps. No, it's a move in the wrong direction. You know, sometimes doing nothing is better than moving in the wrong direction. So, yeah, this is the tragedy of the European Union. It's constantly wasting opportunities to take advantage of the crisis, to exploit the crisis in order to move in the right direction. They move in the wrong direction, and even some progressives get conned into believing that it is the right direction. We just need to push, a bit faster in that direction. No. And DiEM25 is, I don't know any other movement in Europe, or indeed any other political party, not a single political party. Maybe there is one, you should tell me which one it is, that is making that assessment of what's happening in the European Union at the moment. Where we failed is in turning our analysis into action. We're still as many as we were a few years ago. Let's be self-critical for a moment. You see my face, I see your face, we're the same people. We don't have that many more members. We have not made much of a splash in the European Parliament elections. We failed to run in several countries, Belgium included, the Netherlands included. We need to do better politically. We need to find ways of converting our analysis and our transnational agenda and structure, which is splendid, into a movement that actually can do stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanis. And it's really true, just one of the things that you mentioned, that the European Union is in many ways the apotheosis of the neoliberal project, in that it has taken politics and has absolutely bureaucratized it. This idea that things are beyond our reach and beyond our influence, the famous quote about the economy being too important to be left to democracy and to elections and so on. I forget who said that. Who was it again? Anyway, so it's really important, among all the other things that we're doing, that at the very core of DiEM25's project is bringing politics back to people. And there you, of course, every time will run the risk of being called a populist for it. Because the very notion of making politics accessible and speaking about political matters, which are seen as exclusively, what's the word? Technocratized, professionalized, translating that into something that people can have an opinion on and can vote on that basis, is seen as populist, oversimplification, if you like, of very, very complex matters that people don't understand. And I think this element, both when we talk about our own national politics, because this is a problem regardless of the European Union, this is something that has happened to all of our countries, in Europe especially, but also to the European project itself, is to break it down, is to make it accessible, is to make it understandable. And this is why the EU is really double-speak paradise. You can say that you're doing whatever you want, and it doesn't need to have any kind of basis on reality, which is what Macron and Merkel are doing now. They're pushing for one thing when in fact they're doing another. And that can totally fly in Europe today, in a Europe where politics is out of our reach. So it's really, really important also, this element of our work of making politics accessible to people. I see we will try and go man, woman when it comes to the floor, but right now we have David who's requesting the floor. So we'll go to Mr. Castro first.
Thanks, Eric. Just to building on what Yanis was saying, ending on what he mentioned about our, let's say, lack of success in being able to compete in the European elections in Belgium. I mean, let's think about that. I mean, what did we try to do last year? We tried to do something in Belgium, which, to be honest, is not something that has really happened in the country before, which is to have a common program for the whole of the country, but also to have a program that is embedded as part of the transnational movement that is DiEM25. And we had a very easy choice back then. I remember the decision that we made. We said, well, do we decide to take the easy route and run in Flanders or run in Wallonia? Because that would have been much easier for us, given that we would only needed 5,000 signatures instead of 10,000 signatures. But we made the decision to take the harder route, which was to say, let's try to obtain the 10,000 signatures from citizens, or 5 signatures in each electoral college from 5 sitting MPs, right? And because we said we're not going to go to the people in Belgium with just to people in Flanders or just to people in Wallonia, we need to have a common program for the whole country. And on top of that, I mean, we've obviously failed to get the 10,000 signatures, but also there was the other alternative, which was to obtain the 5 signatures from sitting MPs, except that those sitting MPs were given directives basically by their own parties. This, I'm just calling it out as it is, not to allow DiEM25 to compete against them, because our political message was a political message that offered something that was in competition to what they wanted to do. So this is the kind of feudalism that I think we've talked about a little bit before within progressives in the left. Now, I'm sat here in my house, the commission is 200 meters away. The Vlaams Belang headquarters is also 200 meters away in the opposite direction, the far right party in Flanders, right? And we as DiEM have a unique opportunity to say, we have to come up with a common program to be able to say, if we're in government tomorrow morning, what are we offering people in Belgium across the country, right? We need to have answers to those very topics. So what I would argue is that there are 2 points we need to make, at least in terms of how to proceed, not just in Belgium, but also in the Netherlands and in Luxembourg. Point number one is to say that we need to grow our membership. This is something that Yanis alluded to earlier. We're the same people here, and we need to grow beyond this group. So how do we do that? We need to come up with a plan, and we need to execute that plan, and then evaluate whether that plan is working or not, and then repeat, rinse and repeat until we find the correct solution. So that's something that I think we can all get down to work on it right now. Point number two is developing a political program for each of our countries that is obviously linked to what our transnational spirit of DiEM25, so that we have the answers to convince people about what are we going to do about healthcare, what are we going to do about climate change, what are we going to do about some of the issues that we'll be talking about today. So those are the two things that I would like us to perhaps focus on. I would love some answers at least, or to begin a discussion on this topic, so that we, on the one hand, grow our membership, and on the other hand, have a political answer to some of the big questions of our time. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much, David. I think we're doing terribly when it comes to gender parity. We have Niels coming up next, but I would really like to encourage also our women panelists to request the floor. But in the meantime, we go to Niels. Niels, floor is yours, mate.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, I would like to say here in Belgium, we are on the sort of the charming border between Germanic Europe and Latin Europe, though I think Euro system wise, we might be more into the Southern Europe part. But still, in Belgium, people are still mostly better well off than in Southern Europe. And maybe people don't look that much past their border. And also, people mostly identify mostly with their local communities, have their own problems and difficulties. Also here there is precarity and less job security. And yeah, people don't think much further, think, okay, those Greeks and those Italians, they mess up anyway, they have to pay for it. Maybe not so much in Belgium, but more in the Netherlands. It's not a problem. And this Europe, it's disintegrating anyway. So as long as I have my stuff in order, then it's not my problem anymore. So yeah, we have to make people see things in a bigger perspective.
Thanks very much, Niels. It's very true. And I think the particularity of the Belgian case is quite instructive for Europe. I mean, we're talking about a country that is split linguistically between the Dutch-speaking, French-speaking, both living in the same country. That also means that your political parties are split. You have different parties in Flanders, you have different parties in Wallonia, and still, sorry?
In Wallonia, most people vote socialist, as it's sort of the more poorer part nowadays. It used to be in the 19th century, the industrial part. While Flanders is richer and votes mostly conservative, nationalist, and wants to keep the money in the north.
Exactly. So you also have political divides within the same country. So there are a lot, but at the same time, you still operate a singular federal nation. The Belgian case is very instructive, and I think this often leads to a lot of frustration that drives people away from national politics and more to the local level. At least this has been my experience here as an outsider, let's say, that people in Belgium are very, very political, but they project that political engagement to the local level, you know, to their communities, to their cities. That is where the beating heart of Belgian politics is extremely active, and where a lot of the progressive thought of Belgium is. But exactly because it's so granular, you don't have a lot of more ambitious projection to a bigger level where real sort of radical change can happen. And that change is mostly limited to the local level. In many ways, you see that in Europe as well, because of how we are split to our local levels, our cities, our countries, and so on, do not see how we can create a unified, common project for the whole. We often fail to really implement the kind of radical change that we would need to make that granular change happen and become more sustainable as well. And we don't see them both as one coherent whole, as the same struggle, right? So I think that's interesting. Sorry about that intervention. I'm abusing a bit my power as a moderator, but like I said, Belgium is very close to my heart. We have coming up next, Rosita. Rosita, floor is yours.
Well, Belgium is very difficult. It's a sort of similarity with Europe. Wallonia can't vote for the Flanders, and Flanders can't vote for Wallonia. So they can't vote them away too. So the Flanders when you vote for Flanders, they are not responsible for Wallonia, so they don't care what they decide. And that's the same in Europe. We can't vote for the Greece, and the Greece can't vote for Belgium. So, and not for German. Why should German be accountable for what is happening in Italy? In Italy. So it's a sort of similarity. And also with the languages, Brussels is multi-language. The Flanders is Dutch, and Wallonia is French. So it's very difficult to make a pan-European movement in Belgium, because when we speak English with all kinds of people who lives in Brussels, who is multi-language, it's the Flanders don't like that. The Flanders don't like even the French-speaking people, and vice versa. With Wallonia, they don't like the Dutch speaking language. So Belgium is a very difficult country, but it's a similarity to Europe. I also heard Yanis Varoufakis say about lots of money comes from everywhere. And a lot of money will be put into the economy to ease the crisis. Measures taken by the European, the central, regional, and the local authorities, they must be transparent, monitor, and accountable. Actually, we need a tracking tool and a public integrity authority and a reinforced European anti-fraud office to prevent corruption and protect the rule of law. And it seems that the European Commission is considering creating a new authority to police the financial crime and monitor the banks more strictly. I hope it will be an independent body and not a part of the European Banking Authority, because recent Adam Farkas, who is used to be the watchdog on the banks in the euro, has now taken the revolving door to the largest lobbying organization in the financial sector. So long we have a revolving door from the banks and the multinationals into politics, our democracy will fade away. And something else, what I saw happening during the Corona crisis is Ursula von der Leyen had promised to address the gender pay gap, but it couldn't happen during Corona crisis. This was a betrayal against millions of women, and certainly against those who were in the front line of the crisis. We need really democracy on the workplaces with fair wages. That's something that we have in the Green New Deal too. Another thing I wanted to point out, the communications from our experts on the coronavirus in Belgium was very transparent. But we couldn't see the papers and control what the experts had decided on the one hand and the politics on the other hand. We citizens must be able to see what decisions are made. I'll let speak others. Maybe I have a lot of points I can talk about, but I will give the floor to somebody else.
Thank you, Rosita. We also have BlackRock advising the European Commission on environmental rules for banks, while at the same time a former BlackRock consultant eyeing up the chancellorship in Germany. It's difficult to stay optimistic and to stay positive about politics in Europe right now. They're not helping themselves. Okay, next up we go to the Netherlands, I believe.
Thank you. What Rosita is saying is the same in Holland. Actually, we do have quite a bit of transparency concerning the COVID measures, but on the other hand, why the decisions are made is a complete mystery to all of us. We don't know what is done through politics and what is done through scientists, and that should be different. I agree on that. Coming back to something Yanis was saying on the Euro bonds, it's difficult for us Dutch to be not feel attacked when we're talking about these bonds, because our government has decided to be against just about anything that's happening. The strange thing is the Dutch people also have the same opinion, and that's the weirdest thing. If you look in the media and you see the polls that are being held, then you see that 60%, 80% of the people are in line with the government policies. Whilst if you look at the amount of people that are voting progressive, which is approximately between 20 and 30% in Holland, this doesn't add up really. So there's a media story in here, because we get a lot of media stories about corruption in southern countries, which is flooding our news really. Even now during the Corona crisis, all these things keep coming up in our newspapers, which is molding our way of thinking of southern countries, and which I think is a bad thing. I totally disagree with what my government is doing at the moment. But on the other hand, I'd also understand why my country is going that way, because of what the government and the press are feeding us at the moment. So I understand now, and that we have our press, for instance, is saying, well, if we go into Euro bonds, that's like we are giving a gift, because what they are doing is we giving them money and they give us debts in return. And that is what the press is saying, and that's also what our ministers are saying. And this way we get brainwashed in a way to agree with our government. And there's no easy way to get around this, what we call in Dutch, a 1-2, like in soccer, between the press and the government. That's not easy to get in between. But I think if we do need to stand a chance, then for us as DiEM, we do need to get in between those two. We need to get into that debate, and we need to and we at the moment, I mean, I can't even get an advertisement for our local meeting in our papers, because they tell us, no, we already have an advertising account with another political party. And when I explain them, we're not a political party, we're a political movement, they still say, sorry, but we're not going to run it. We need to get in the face of the Dutch people on a different level. And I think the only level that we have is at the moment is through the internet, because that's the only thing that's not 100% governed by the press and the government themselves. So I think there is our way in, and I think I don't know if we have to start making I don't know glamorous pictures of Yanis in Instagram, or that we have to start making memes from Prosecco or whatever, as long as we do get somewhere, and we need to get virals, basically. That's what we need. We need to get them on Twitter and Instagram, and yeah, well, for what we look at in Holland, Facebook is going down the drain at the moment, because only from the young people, only 50% of the young people still have Facebook. So we need to get to the other topics like Snapchat, Instagram, and WhatsApp. Those are the things that they use. So that's my idea from where we have to move to. Thank you.
No, thank you. And it really ties in with what we were saying earlier about becoming accessible, making politics accessible, but that also means making ourselves accessible as a movement. So now I think we go back to Belgium with, first we go to Excel.
Hi everyone, thank you all for being here, and it's a pleasure to be able to talk to all of you guys, my peers and people in other countries also working on similar issues. I think the Belgian situation is also quite interesting, because we have this phenomenon right now where we only were really granted this government due to the crisis. So that's something we can talk about. But also I kind of wanted to recenter the conversation a little bit, because I feel that right now the crisis itself is like an opportunity to solidify around our people's pressing concerns in Belgium. And we can kind of see more what has come to light through this crisis. So one of the main questions we were asking ourselves in the Belgian NC is, what should our demands be as we transition out of quarantine? Because as you know, maybe the quarantine is starting to lift here. It will start to lift in many other countries, and we have to be ready for that moment. So one of the things that we have, maybe just slingshotting this for anyone that wants to weigh in, but some of the things we did come up with was supporting all of the workers that are rendered more precarious due to the crisis, obviously healthcare workers, but also people in other sectors like gastronomy, especially delivery, etc. A potential call for the socialization of essential sectors like health, utilities, water, and also this idea of like people's bailouts. Should we call for that? What about UBD? And kind of a renewed interest in really pushing the Green New Deal for Europe on our level, and really digging into, once more going back to the people, really digging into that initial proposal of people's assemblies. Can we take the time now to really experiment with that on the ground, now that we've done this Green New Deal tour? Maybe with the people's assemblies in Belgium, and try and link to the concerns of people during this crisis. So I think those are kind of our main questions, and I wonder, what you're working on more in the Netherlands in that line. Yeah.
Thank you, Excel. Hope our Dutch comrades are taking notes so we can get back to this. Now we go to a DiEM25 veteran, Claire. Claire, floor is yours. Hang on, Claire, you need to start again. I need to unmute you. Or you need to unmute. Yes. There you go. Yeah, go for it.
We talked about the European elections. We lack rooting in the Belgian society, and chiefly among French-speaking people. I let the comrades from Flanders speak about Flanders, but in the French-speaking part, we lack activists. Yes, we must attract young people, students in the universities, and we are very weak. We need far more visibility. Something else in the new NC, we have more Belgians. I mean people speaking Dutch or French, because if we don't speak the language people speak, it's impossible to do work on grassroots. So we understand it's very important to write in French and Dutch, and to translate in French and Dutch. We are doing that. Axel began to speak about what to do. I think one of the first things is information, because people are caught between the propaganda, the mainstream propaganda from the European Union. All right, everything is under control. Don't worry, we are taking care for you, and so on. And the other side is complotist sites. So information is very, very significant, and I agree with our Dutch comrade. We have work to do on the social media. But on the social media, we reach always the same people. So how to reach everybody? It's the first thing. We have to show alternative. We have a Green New Deal. Greek comrades, they succeeded in Greece in linking European problems with local problems, and it was very hard for them. In Belgium last year, we had a working group with more or less 10 people working about how to present the Green New Deal for Belgium. So we began. No, the lockdown is finished, not yet, but it will be finished. And so we can do like Bernie Sanders did in the United States, to meet people, to ask them about their concerns, and to do a grassroots work. The matters very significant today is, of course, public health, public services, fiscal justice, and something important too is convince people by acting. I don't speak there about, because one of our friends, I think it's Adrian, has a lot of ideas about cooperative businesses. It's a way to act and to attract people on action. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Okay, now I think we're heading over to our neighbors in Luxembourg. Birte.
Yes, hello. I'm Birte from Luxembourg, and we're here in Luxembourg. We're having also the language issue, like you have in Belgium, and thus we always have the discussion how to approach people. Here in Luxembourg, we have basically 5 languages, more or less. So of course we have Luxembourgish, which is the national language. Then we have French, which is one of the most spoken languages. We have German. We have Portuguese, because there are many people coming originally from Portugal. And of course we have English, because there are many expats, etc. here. So basically what we're trying to do, for example, on our social media channels, that's to mix the languages. So either to switch, one post is in French, the next one in English, one in Luxembourgish, and so on. Or especially on Facebook, where we can have longer posts. Sometimes we have the same texts in one post, but in 3 or 4 different languages. But of course, this is very hard to get the message across, because if you start reading something and you see it's not my native language, then often you stop reading immediately, especially for people who are not so familiar with the first language that we start with. So this is basically a big issue we are facing here as well.
Thank you. That's incredible. You must have the most languages per capita of any country anywhere in this tiny little corner of Europe. Is there anybody that'd like the floor? I don't see any requests currently. We have Adrian, and then let's try and go back to the CC for some feedback on some of the points that have been raised. So, Adrian.
Hello, everyone. I would like to go on a bit about the Belgian politics, because it's what Rosita already raised. To mobilize on the Belgian level, we need to engage in the Belgian politics, which is for years now in total disarray. So the similarities between Europe and Belgium is very similar because it's also disintegrating. The two largest parties in Flanders, the northern region in Belgium, are nationalist parties and had over 40% of the vote in the last election. They have been using the Flanders First slogan for years now. They spread their view that the wealthy north should stop paying for our lazy socialist southern part of the country. So one of the driving forces is in the split in our country is definitely the economics, but also our institutional structure, like Rosita raised. This further aggravates the situation very hard. The Flemish nationalists, they want to split our country because it's not working anymore. And it's not working anymore, they mean that we are unable to form a federal government for also many years now. It's very difficult. I think we hold the world record with longest time without a government, together with Iraq. So it's funny but sad also. So this opposition between the two parts of our country is because we have no federal constituency, meaning that I, as a Belgian citizen from Flanders, can vote on a political party from Wallonia or Brussels, and the politicians have no incentive to represent my interests, and that's why it's very difficult to form a federal government. So in Flanders, the reaction on this deadlock is nationalism. And it's very hard because I would like to discuss solutions with DiEM25 members on how to change that to internationalism. I would like to see DiEM25 take part in that discussion, how we can organize our country. And I think we can, if we want to mix in Belgian politics, that needs to go first, because we're in a deadlock. We can't do anything policy-wise because of this constitutional or institutional crisis. That's what I want to say.
Thank you, Adrian. It'd be interesting also to hear if there is appetite in Belgium for a party that would be able to represent Flemish people in Wallonia and Wallonians in Flanders, because that is in many ways what DiEM is trying to do. And there is a question whether there is appetite for that in Europe, you know, to have a party that can represent you in Italy, can represent you in Germany, that you hold exactly the same program in common everywhere, you know, as Europeans, as DiEMers. It's interesting to have the conversation. Like we said earlier, Belgium is a very interesting case study as a mini Europe in many ways because of its location and its history and its diversity. Now we're going to go to Michael. Michael?
Hello. Yeah, I'm from Luxembourg, and one of the who has recently become one of the nationals, because Luxembourg is kind of divided between 50% divided up into nationals, Luxembourg nationals, and then the rest are like, I guess you can call them foreigners, I suppose. Which kind of sets out a kind of like a big issue for Luxembourg, is it's called the democracy deficit issue, because 50% of the inhabitants cannot vote at the national elections, and only vote at the communal election, which, by the way, was something which was enforced through EU legislation, not something that was demanded by the Luxembourgish nationals. So we have a big issue with that, and for the European campaign, we joined a left-wing party in trying to get other European citizens to vote for the Luxembourgish MPs, which was it was a task, because if people already have a right to vote for the country from where they came from, it's kind of a challenge to try to, and if they are not feeling so integrated into that country and only work in Luxembourg for the money, like many of the European elites, I guess, or the European upper middle, who are not here, who kind of like every 7th year they go in and out of Luxembourg. They're not particularly interested in voting for Luxembourg. So so I guess Luxembourgish is kind of like it's a language. It's a kind of like an issue. Like it's a topic. It's a political issue of, do you want to, like the right wingers would always say Luxembourgish is the only language in this country, and want to promote that, which the government is doing. And the problem is that everything, institutions, the laws, it's all written in French, and that's the only thing that counts. And in the parliament, they speak Luxembourgish. It's not really recognized. There are it's a real institutional thing with, there are some, like the media, some media, like for example, there was an issue with a left-wing party that they wanted to do an advertisement in French, and the RTL, the media, Luxembourg media, they didn't accept it. They wanted it to be in Luxembourgish, but they couldn't. They were not allowed to say that, but it was really a political issue. So I think that's one of the biggest issues in Luxembourg. That's what I have to say.
Thank you, Michael. It looks like this Benelux is not just a random geographical combination of countries. There are a lot of common threads along all of these nations. It seems language is one of them. As we're going now, we're coming to the 1 hour mark, meaning we have another hour left. I'd like us to wrap up the political discussion and start moving also towards more practical ideas. We already had some ideas about social media becoming more available, more accessible to people and so on. We can go into more depth about that. And also I'd like to invite now some CC members perhaps to respond to some of the things that have been said. I know Yanis had his hand up earlier, so maybe we start with Yanis and then we go to others. Yanis?
Thank you, Eric. I wanted to respond to some of the points, primarily the point that Niels and particularly Pierre Hein put forward. I hear you when you say that as a Dutchman, as a Dutch person, you are being at the forefront of being criticized by non-Dutch people, especially by Southerners, for what your government is doing. This is why we created DiEM, so that you don't feel that way. Because in DiEM, you're not Dutch or Greek or German. We're progressive Europeans who happen to be Dutch, Greek, German, and who understand that nationalism is toxic. And as part of its toxicity, it assumes collective responsibility. We reject collective responsibility. As a Greek, I'm not responsible for the Greek oligarchy. As a Dutchman, you're not responsible for Mr. Hekstra, your finance minister. Okay, so let's be clear on this. But I want to go beyond that. You said how difficult it is, you explained to us, and I understand that, to go against the conventional wisdom in Holland, but not just in Holland, in Flanders, in Sweden, in Austria, in Germany, that the Southerners want to pass their debts on to us, and they want our creditworthiness. They want our savings in exchange for their debts. This is the narrative, right? And it's such an easy narrative to push through. It is as easy as it is wrong. When you say that it's very hard to deconstruct this argument, I disagree with you. I disagree with you. You see, I remember when in 2010 Greece went bankrupt, we were being accused collectively as Greeks for being free riders, freeloaders. That, you know, for years we used the European Union's funding in order to live the good life, the easy life, like, you know, the fabled grasshoppers in Aesop's myth. And then when the going got tough, we went cap in hand to the north and asked for loans, when that was not the case. What had really happened was that the Dutch banks and the German banks, the banks that were full of liquidity, of money, and they didn't know what to do with it, they were coming to countries that had far less money, and they were unloading that money in the form of loans, you know, predatory loans. So, why? Because, you know, Holland has a trade surplus of 10% of GDP, correct? It's around 10% of GDP, your trade surplus, your current account surplus. Now, what does that mean? It means it sounds fantastic. You know, you sell a lot more than you buy. So you end up with lots of money coming out into the country from abroad. Where does this money go? It goes into your banking system. The companies that make these profits, they put it in the banks. The banks cannot lend it because the Dutch don't have enough demand for those loans. Similarly in Germany, right? So they need to export that money to places that are in deficit, to the Italians, to the Spanish, to the Greeks. And because there is a shortage of cash in the deficit countries, by definition, the interest rates are higher. So it is the duty of Dutch bankers and German bankers to unload lots of loans upon the Greeks and the Italians and the Spaniards. You know, if they don't do that, they're not doing their job. But, you know, at some point, when you take all these mountains of money and you shift it to Greece, to Italy, and so on, that creates bubbles. Those bubbles burst. Then the lenders cannot repay their debts. And then the Dutch banks and the German banks collapse. To cut a very long story short, let me put it, how would I say it succinctly in a Dutch television program? Because, you know, you only have 1 minute, and if you don't manage to make your point in 1 minute, you're finished, as you know. So let's not have a long analysis. Well, it's really very simple. You cannot simultaneously celebrate your surpluses and castigate others for being in deficit. That's, you know, bad arithmetic. If I have a huge surplus with you, you have a huge deficit with me. I cannot simultaneously celebrate, yes, I have a huge surplus, and at the same time say, how dare you have a big deficit? Point number one, right? Simple arithmetic. If you violate that, you're violating the rules of arithmetic. Secondly, this is an argument that I would use towards our Flanders friends, our Flemish friends. and our Dutch friends and our German friends who believe that story, that, you know, Wallonia or Italy want their money. Well, your money, is it, how did you manage to have all this money? It's because of net exports. Net exports to Italy, to Greece, to China, to Britain, to the United States. Let's think about it. What would have happened if Italy was not part of your currency area? What would happen to, I would say, to somebody from Flanders if Wallonia was not part of the Flanders currency union? What would happen then? The currency that you would have in Flanders or in Germany would go through the roof. Because if you are, you know, if you have a currency that is valid only in an area that is in surplus to the rest of the world, that currency goes through the roof. So you lose all your exports. So maybe your money is not really your money. Maybe your savings are as a result of the fact that you've got the Greeces and the Wallonians inside the union. So you can't say, you know, that's your problem. You know, my money is my money and your problem is your problem. Because this logic would lead with mathematical precision to the split of Belgium and to the split of the European Union. And then you are stuffed, mate. Because then your, you know, whatever you call your currency, whether it's the Deutschmark, it's probably going to be the Deutschmark because Flanders are not going to have their own currency. They will be attached to the new Deutschmark zone, right? Deutschmark goes through the roof and you lose you become unemployed. So you're free, you are exactly as much of a free rider as the Walloons and as the Italians. You know, so, you know, pointing fingers and saying, oh, it's your, you know, it's my money, and your debt is very bad economics. So in other words, Adrian and the rest, I would turn to them and say, you know what your problem is? It's not that you're not solidaristic to Wallonia. It's not that you're not solidaristic to Italy or to Greece. You're just not very good at being selfish. You're just terrible at being selfish. You do not have a concept of your self-interest. You know, you just misunderstand the sources of your riches. Let me, you know, and it always helps to neutralize the discussion by shifting it to the United States. Take California and Arizona. There are two states, they're side by side. You know, Arizona is in huge deficit to California. Always was, always will be, right? Do Californians know that? Not really. Do they care? Not really. Do they turn against Arizonans? No. Do they say, you know, bugger off, get out of the union? You know, it's my surplus, I don't care about you? No. You know, because California would lose all its riches if it lost Arizona. So, you know, the American bond, the US bond, the equivalent of a Euro bond, which is the US Treasury bills, what does it do? It creates a common debt that allows the federal government to spend money in Arizona in a variety of ways. Firstly, you know, through unemployment benefits. There's more unemployment in Arizona than in California. So there's a transfer of money from California to Arizona through the equivalent of the Euro bonds, the US Treasury bills. There are other ways of doing it. When, you know, Boeing gets a contract to build a new fighter jet for the Pentagon says to them, build it in Arizona or in Missouri, in a deficit state. If this is not philanthropy. This is not solidarity with Missouri or solidarity with Arizona. It's selfishness. Because only by creating investment in Arizona and Missouri are they pushing the incomes of the Arizonians and the Missourians up so they can keep buying Californian wine and, you know, Silicon Valley products from San Francisco. If they don't do that, then California will suffer. The Californians know that. At least most Californians know that. It's only stupid Europeans. Because, you know, the Europeans are the stupidest people on the planet. And Europe is the stupidest continent in the galactic empire. Sorry, I'm a Trekkie, I think in terms of, you know, federation. But we're very dumb. You know, we keep pointing fingers at one another because we don't have the institutions. It's not a question of solidarity. Drop solidarity. We should never argue in terms of solidarity. You know, solidarity should be amongst us, DiEMers. Solidarity should be among, you know, between the working classes to fight the oligarchy. But to argue for the Eurobond on the basis of solidarity is a very silly thing to do. You know, because if I go to the Dutch finance minister and I say, Mr. Hoekstra or Mr. Dijsselbloem before that, that other bloom of Europe, we need you to support Eurobonds because the rich don't have to help Greece because of solidarity. He will turn around and rightly. He'll say to me, well, solidarity means I'll give you some money. Yeah, whatever money I have to spare, I'll give it to you, especially during a bad time like 2010 or coronavirus, whatever. Why should I get into joint debt with you? Do you go into joint, you know, when you see somebody on the street who's hungry, you may give them some money, and that's solidarity, right? But you would never go to a bank with them and take out a loan together. And the Dutch finance minister would be right on this. So it's not solidarity. We don't want a Eurobond for solidarity purposes. We want a Eurobond because it is the only way of preserving Dutch surpluses. Okay, so whereas they are presenting the Eurobond as a way of taking away Dutch surpluses and giving it to the riffraff of Europe, the way we should be presenting it to them is, you want to present your surpluses, you need a Eurobond made. And if you don't understand that, you know what? You're very stupid. Make them feel stupid because, you know what? They are. They're not that clever. Okay, I've had my moment.
There we go. Psychological warfare against the European elite. Make them feel stupid. Make them realize how stupid they are. And it's totally coherent with what we're saying about democratizing Europe. We're not doing it because it's the right thing to do vis-a-vis solidarity with the poor South. We're doing it because it's the only thing that can save the European Union from itself. So it stems from exactly the same argumentation, completely consistent with DiEM25 from the beginning. Let's continue with other CC members. We have CC of the CC, and then we have Ivana as well. Let's start with CC.
Hi, I was very interested in the discussion we had, and I want to focus on Adrian's speech, which I found very interesting concerning nationalism. In my opinion, nationalism is the side effect of the failure of the European Union to provide decent lives and working conditions for the people. This feeds into the ultra-right-wing parties, and they make the people who suffer the poverty and the deprivation imposed by an oligarchic EU, they make them find resort and solace and a sense of identity amongst the right-wingers. This is all over Europe, and it also has to do, it's not an accidental phenomenon, it has also to do with the fact that the social democrat parties of Europe have failed in their mission. In fact, they became same as neoliberal parties. So there is a tremendous vacuum left by a proper left. In Greece, we have seen this in the Golden Dawn, that it happened a few years ago to achieve popularity and a very good percentage. Okay, talking about a country which is constituted by migrants and which has been suffering from all sorts of migration and brain drain, in particular because of the memoranda. So that's the first point. Second, what feeds nationalism in particular has to do with what Pete, I'm sorry if I don't pronunciation Piet Hein. Yes, name, sorry about this. I'm not good at Dutch. I mean, actually, I don't know any Dutch. A very important point about the issue of corruption. Here we have the general national and nationalist stereotypes on which the right wing feeds. The basic stereotype that we in Greece suffered during the memoranda, still suffering. And Yanis knows very well about this when he was Minister of Economics in Syriza, to which I used to belong until our referendum. The basic nationalist stereotype is the lazy and corrupt Southerners in comparison with the Protestant and hardworking Northerners. My point is, because there is a time limit, my main point is that corruption is endemic to capitalism. There is no capitalism without corruption. Let's think about various scandals in Germany, like the one referring a few years ago, I think, to Volkswagen, and so on and so forth. The way in which big American tycoons were created as tycoons, and so on and so forth. Hence, the stereotype of the corrupt politician. The main difference, in my opinion, is how pervasive is corruption, and whether it is petty corruption that involves all levels of society, or high corruption, which is not easily visible because it happens between the economic oligarchy and various institutions, of transnational institutions. This kind of corruption is the most sort of sinister and pernicious because it's not revealed to the people. Okay, third point, and I'm closing. The only way to fight nationalism is a new international, a new kind of internationalism, which is, however, based on the real problems that people are facing in all European countries. And I'm talking about, for example, and this is just a tiny example, but huge for people's life, the issue of job precarity, which I think is something that permeates the whole of Europe. And when I say Europe, I don't mean only the EU. So if we build some sort of program, political program that relies on post-capitalism, targeting jobs precarity, then the issue of the young generations and not wanting to be involved in politics, correctly or incorrectly so, in my opinion, will be solved, because there they find a solution for their everyday life and future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sissi. I think it's on that last point, it's very pertinent. And you see the Social Democrats, they bet on the receding value of socialism, on the receding value of, the way Marx would present his political analysis, and went towards the center. The result is history. It's a complete annihilation of the political relevance of Social Democrats everywhere in Europe, arguably everywhere in the world, and a gradual return to more radical politics, to, what people could also refer to as political extremes. To a repolarization of politics, to a politics of values, of principles. And the Social Democrats are completely irrelevant in this new forming political arena because they give up on that. That was a trend we were already seeing with Corbynism. We were seeing it with the radicalization of younger generations, with the environmental crisis, the Fridays for Future, and so on, even before COVID-19, even before the tsunami that is the financial catastrophe that is heading our way as a result of the pandemic. So really, this post-capitalism narrative and the post-capitalism political solutions that it could lead to are really, I think, 100% where DiEM25 could absolutely excel. And absolutely where we need to be putting most of our effort in developing and in organizing. So I couldn't agree more, basically. Let's go to Ivana, and then we go to Rosita.
Yes, it's great that CC moved the discussion towards post-capitalism and nationalism, because this is precisely something that I wanted to comment, particularly on the issue on language, because I'm coming from Yugoslavia. This was once upon a time a federation of 6 republics, and we spoke 3 languages. And then when it collapsed, all of a sudden we had 7 languages, which are now different languages, and all our little nations, insignificant otherwise, are building their national identity on very little language, small languages. You will know how important the language is when you see how many books are published in that language during 1 year. And then you see how insignificant that number is. So precisely because we are not Belgians, Portuguese, Serbs, whatever, it's important that we have international identity as DiEMers, and that within DiEM, DiEMers from Croatia, Bosnia, and Serbia managed to agree to, have one button on DiEM's website for languages, because that's the same language, and that shouldn't be an issue for us. That's maybe an issue in business as usual politics and our warmongering politicians, because they ring that alarm every time when they need some votes for elections, which are coming, all the time. So my advice to you would be, don't make an issue out of the language. It's not, if you communicate to people's problems, to people's feelings, then the language is universal. And to do that, what Axel and Claire were saying is the key. To get activated and to find some burning issues in your local environments, in your neighborhoods, and start campaigning on something small. Don't aim to change the world immediately. Find something small and winnable, which can bring you more members, and then you will have, Pete, the content for Instagram and Twitter, because we cannot just tweet our pretty faces, but if you have an action, if you do something out there for the people, with people, then you will have something to tweet. So on action points, I would like to, maybe until the end of this call, to hear some more from you. What would be one action point winnable in all of your countries? Thank you.
Thank you, Ivana, and thank you for that flawless transition to the second part of this call, which is the actions. What could we possibly do? And with that, we go back to our grassroots organizers, starting with Rosita. Rosita, floor is yours.
I think by actions, I think the young people live off videos and social media. They are very clever with this. I think we have to prepare videos, how we explained our DiEM25 with little videos, so they can find, new people can find this and share that with their friends and so on, instead of always going on the street or trying to go to demonstrations. When you go to demonstrations, you go with your friends, you go there to demonstrate, and you come back. You don't, maybe you will find 1 or 2 friends, but that's not enough. We have to share videos, explain little by little what is our Green New Deal, little by little what the DiEM25 is. That's what we need. so they can find it individual and share it individual with their friends. That's I think we absolutely need.
Thank you very much, Rosita. And it's also very true that things like videos in a COVID world are some of the things we can actually do, you know, because you can do it at home. It's important to also try and adapt our sort of activism to the kind of realities that we're faced with these days, such as what we're doing now, Beyond the Balcony. We go to Peter Heijn.
Thank you. I want to address the same point as Rosita just made. I think what we're doing right now with the balcony sessions is a start for this, but especially the young people are not going to watch a 2-hour video. We need to cut some sound bites out of this and start putting those sound bites into tweets, putting them into a little Tick-Tock messages or whatever is out there, just to get their attention and send them our way. Something that what was talked about earlier was the language barrier that they're having. That's what's being called a Babylonical reflex. That means that once you like in the Bible, where you the people who building the Babylon Tower couldn't understand each other anymore, so they started to look at what was different about each other. Well, the solution for that is to look at what is the same in everybody. So we have to look at what do we have in common, and have to address those points. So the trick, I think, what Luxembourg and what Belgium are having is probably more important for them than for the Dutch, because in Holland what we do have a lot of dialects, but we basically all speak the same language. But there we have the problem that we have a small part of the country which is I think who was it that said it? There's too little people who are taking up the whole media. Like for instance, we in Holland have Luxembourgian language news every morning from 6 to 7. Why is that? Because our laws oblige it for RTL to are allowed to send their messages out to us. They have to have their Luxembourgian identity. So I know, and I think it's a lovely language, Luxembourgian. I think it's very good good to follow for us. But in the Dutch media, we need something different, and I don't know what yet, but I'm open to suggestions. And like we were talking about the things like we have a poster campaign in Holland called Loesje, which is where we put posters on top of billboards, and on the posters is a little just one sentence with a joke, and the name Loesje, which gives us a small kind of people that will look at it. It's underground, and what we need is something that's on the top of the mountain of the media. And so if anybody else has a suggestion there, I would like to hear that. I also want to go back to Yanis's when you talked about how the Netherlands works. The Netherlands isn't quite what the outside of the world looks at it. They look at us as a very rich country with a great surplus, but there's also a downside to that. In Holland, 60% of the people own a house, but that house is mortgaged for 120%. That means that every Dutch person has more debts than he has possessions. there's which means that we that the surplus and all that stuff, the macroeconomic stuff, is not shared within the basic population. There's only I think what is it, 2.3% who own 33% of what is the money and the things that have value in Holland. So we even put out all our money into pension funds so that we could have a pension in the end. And all those pension funds are now, they have put it into stocks. And since the beginning of the coronavirus, those stocks went down. And now they are telling us that they have to cut on, for instance, the pensions or the social welfares because of that. So there is a great difference between what the outside is looking at us for, those rich bastards that don't want to lend out their money, to what we here are really feeling, because and I think I'm one of them, but 8.2% of the Dutch people live underneath the poverty line, what is called. So we do have a especially if you have a disability welfare grant, then you almost automatically go underneath the poverty line in our country, and all those things, all those what do you call them? All those variables are not not mentioned in the macroeconomic picture, but are felt here in the microeconomic picture. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claire.
I want to say something about how to work with other organizations. I think the first question is for what, to do what, and then after with whom. As a movement, I think we can work on limited issues with a lot of organizations, trade unions, parties, but only limited issues. We can take part in their actions. It's very easy. And we can invite them for our actions. That's not so easy because they are always very friendly, but we get no feedback. We have, of course, good partners, Youth for Climate, Students for Climate, Extinction Rebellion, a lot of non-governmental organizations working on social issues, on fair trade, peace and love, and so. There is a joke in Belgium. If we find two Belgian shipwrecked on an island, they had created an association. And it's true, in Belgium we have a lot of association about everything. And we can work with them, yes. With workers' unions, I think it's very, very significant. In Belgium, we have many people, the unionization rate is very high. They are now working for people of health service, public service, and so on. But we have also, not only in Belgium, everywhere in Europe and in the world, a lot of people, more and more, who have no union, people working on platform like Uber, Deliveroo, and so on. And it's gangrening the whole world of the labor because they are destroying the labor right. So I think it's significant to work with them. With parties, I think as a movement we can have very fair relations with the far left party in Belgium, with the Greens, or with even the Social Democrats. or social democrats in Belgium, they are not so bad as a Blairist in UK or like in Germany. Remember some years ago, the Walloon president dared to challenge the CTA only for 1 week, and then he surrendered. But it's possible to work with them, but only on limited issues. I don't think anybody to do an electoral wing with them. Certainly not with the Social Democrat, never. But on a limited issue, I think it's possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. I think now we're going to David.
Thanks, Eric. Just to briefly, last year, somebody from the SPA, a leading the biggest social democrat party, well, at least in Flanders, the only one, the Social Democratic Party, said something to me which made my chin drop. I was completely left flabbergasted by what he said. What he said was that the party wasn't going to be campaigning on migration because, as he put it, it was a fight that they couldn't win. Right, talking here about the abandonment of the Social Democrats for the issues that they should be struggling for. And then another thing he said to me was that, you know, you DiEM25, you have the ideas, but we have the machine, right? And to that, I would say, and to those people watching and to everybody here in this call, let's build that machine, because obviously they already think we have the ideas anyway. So we have the ideas, let's build a machine so we can carry those ideas and make sure that DiEM becomes a successful movement also in this country.
Thank you, David. Couldn't agree more. Now we go to Birte. I think slowly we're in the last 25 minutes, so slowly let's try and wrap up with our interventions as well. Birte.
Yes, thank you. I just shortly wanted to talk about the best practices and key learning that we have gathered here in Luxembourg for the recruitment again. So as it was suggested already here in the call, we do not try to generally raise the brand awareness and just to talk about DiEM randomly, but we communicate with concrete actions and show very concretely what we stand for via these actions. And basically what we tried for this famous tax evasion campaign, Billionaire Pay Your Share campaign, for the first time was to use paid advertisement. So we put that, of course, on Facebook, and we had very controversial discussions about it, if we should give even more money to Facebook or not. But in the end, we decided that it's for a good cause. And we actually had to stop this campaign very soon because, you know, it got cancelled because of Corona, but it was online for 4 days. And it was very, very successful. It even got the whole money that we had planned for 4 weeks, because we got so many clicks on this campaign. So of course it was a pity because we couldn't gain anything because it didn't take place, but we saw that actually a lot of people got interested in it. So this was very positive. Also, we are using sometimes apps like Meetup to publish our events and to make them known. When it comes to offline marketing, as you may know, Breeze, he's very, very famous in hosting onboarding events. So that means making informal meeting to explain people who are new to DiEM what DiEM is about, because we found out that our standard meetings are often too confusing. We're often too deep into a certain topic and we scare new people away with these. So with these onboarding events, we try to get people into the DiEM world slowly. And then we also partner up with other associations or other parties for 2 reasons. One is to really help the cause. Again, for this tax campaign, we talked with associations like Tax Justice Luxembourg or the Left Party here in Luxembourg, because this just gives us more visibility. But also a second side effect is that people involved in these organizations have usually more in common with DiEM, and so they are potential members that we can recruit by talking with them about this specific event. And as Luxembourg is very small, we of course do not stop at the border, because then we wouldn't get very far, but we are also actively looking for potential members and partners in France, in Belgium, and in Germany. Yeah, that's basically what I can share.
Thank you very much, Peter. Also for that more on the ground update. Now we go to Michael, and then we have Axel.
Yeah, I was thinking about, like, because about the point that was raised about universality, that going across languages, and for me the at that moment I thought about like the idea of narratives and the idea of metaphors, that a really strong metaphor is like what can make a real connection to our sense of morality, and so I think it can work. That sort of image, the image can work if you can repeat it and perhaps in different variations. And I mean, for example, there's the whole idea with austerity that you need to earn money in order to spend it, which is just true for the household, which is the household analogy, and also, yeah, and closely connected is the trickle down idea. So I think we need to fight on the morality issues, like of in that way. In that sense, I really like the for example, the Trump's slogan about "Make America Great Again." I think it's a really great slogan, because it involves something with morality, that it tells us, yeah, okay, America wasn't great once, you used to not be great, and you used to be great, and now it's not great, and then. So I see a lot of a lack of imagery in politics, for example, in Luxembourg, that the language is not filled with images, and I think that can also be very quickly adapted to small videos, like what was suggested from Holland, that small videos, and yeah, that's my idea.
Cheers, Michael. Yeah, then again, it's important to go back to what Ivan also said about small campaigns with a beginning, a middle, and an end that are winnable. Success breeds success, and being able to set up causes, setting up struggles, identifying the things that are hot and relevant in society in any given time, being relevant in those struggles with our movement, bringing in a perspective that nobody else can, bringing in this uniqueness of DiEM25 that we all agree about, and having those kinds of campaigns that are hands-on, that present us to society, that inform people of who we are practically through action, rather than through, you know, the passive medium of, let's say, a video or a cool poster, is also important for attracting a more active member, because actions that are more active in their sort of configuration also attract people who are interested in that type of activity. And it's very important that we also attract members who are very interested in doing this type of activism, right? So it's not just a matter of what is strategically more appropriate, but it's also about the kind of movement that we want to be. And I think shifting our attention to more hands-on actions is important also for increasing the membership, and increasing the membership with activists, especially. Just that small addition. Now we go to Axel, and then we have Rosita, and then I think we can slowly start wrapping up.
Hi, so I just wanted to touch back on a point, considering the languages and this kind of broader divisions in our discourse in Europe, also reinstating the fact that we are still united in these common issues in terms of, austerity, the flexibilization of labor, and the less funding for public services. In Belgium, we just had a bunch of nurses turn their backs to, I think, the Prime Minister. So this is really kind of resounding in Belgium right now, and I think across the EU. I also wanted to caution about kind of the social media. Of course, we should push things there, but there's already mediation happening there. There's already all kinds of tech issues, filter bubbles, etc. I really do think that young people want to get involved and want to be active at the level of their communities, but there just isn't maybe that site of social exchange that exists there in that sense. And I think it's our responsibility to build that with community leaders and activists, and to reach out even more to unions and all types of parties. And that's what hopefully, Claire has that kind of expertise, and we want to do that. Something that we were thinking about is just shooting for these experimentations on the people's assemblies and just trying it out, going to different regions, talking to the union leaders in those regions, or even cooperatives, farmers, people that are willing to chat and willing to discuss things. And, experiment, because at the end of the day, we have to try different things. Hopefully they can be used as case studies. So I think that's really something that could be a great time to do. Now, another idea that we had and something we're focusing on is, this rent strike thing that's happening, being organized in France, and potentially for the future across Europe, we will see. But, I think the NC, I've talked with a lot of our members, and it would be nice for us, I think, to take a walk around our neighborhoods in Brussels, find new trajectories, metaphorically, physically, and talk to new people, knock on doors and see, what is your situation right now with your rent? Are you willing to take part in a rent strike? What would you need in order to do so? And just start surveying again where those needs are, just starting with rent. And what people need as a support on that area. Another major thing, and I think something I would be interested to have feedback on, maybe from Yanis and from all other CC members, is this idea of people's bailouts that has been really, really big in the US. And I've honestly been mostly following that conversation, but what would that look like in the EU? And, because for example, we had the Brussels Airlines fiasco and everything, and, Lufthansa, should they go extinct, these companies, and what should we do? The fact that they're tied in with the workers and all that stuff. Is there a way to bail out the workers on that issue? And how do we go about that? Is, Brussels a place to start, maybe, that conversation?
Thank you, Axel. Loving the energy. Let's carry that beyond the balcony and beyond these calls, and really follow up on that with our internal calls. I think there's a lot there that we can unpack and work on. Let's go. Yeah, Yanis needs to leave, so maybe I'll give him the floor now to say goodbye, and then we will go to Rosita and start wrapping up.
Yeah, apologies. I have a television interview, live one, starting in precisely 9 minutes. So, but I won't just say goodbye, because there are at least 2 points I want to raise. First, look, we are the only movement that has made the point again and again, and quite analytically, that the majorities in the so-called surplus countries like Germany, Austria, Holland, suffer. And this is why we are rejecting any call for a union of the South. We are all about the union of the majorities across Europe, including in Holland, in Germany, and so on. We made, when I was running in the European Parliament election in Germany, I was making the point that the people of Greece need to show solidarity to the working class of Germany, because in the last 15 years, their living standards have fallen while the country is swimming in surpluses. What you mentioned, Piet Hein, is exactly this, that the same thing happens in Holland. So you have this antinomy, this contradiction. You have a country like Holland, which is swimming in surpluses, where 60% of the people, right, as you said, they're up to there in debt, in private debt. And this is also a reminder that where public debt is low, private debt is high. So total debt, there's an isomorphism, as they say in mathematics. Total amount of debt in capital is more or less the same. In some countries, you have a lot of private debt and low public debt. In other countries, it's the opposite. Think Italy. Italy is the opposite of Holland. You have a high public debt and very low private debt compared to Italy, to Holland. In Holland, it's the opposite. But the European Union has created a central bank that rolls over private debts through the ECB and penalizes public debt. So let me put it this way. If Japan was in the European Union, it would have died. It would have died because Japan is another Italy. High public debt, very low private debt. So, and when you have these kinds of incongruities within a monetary union, the result is that the majority suffers everywhere, in Italy and in Holland. And we are the only movement that can actually say that. We can say solidarity with the Dutch, okay, who are the greatest victim of Dutch surpluses. This is what, this is what class politics is about, right? Now, I think on the question of Axel, I think it was your point about people's bailouts. Well, firstly, one of our 3 points, the interventions of DiEM25 just as the coronavirus crisis hit was, credit every bank account in Europe with a sum of money to begin with, 2,000 euros. For every citizen of Europe, go straight to their bank account. That's a bailout, a people's bailout. And then if you need to do it again, you do it again. And you keep doing it until all boats are lifted by a therapeutic tide, right? What do you do with Lufthansa? What do you do with the large companies? Well, I think that, two things. It depends on how much money, state money they need and what they need it for. Do they need it in order to remain solvent, not to go bankrupt? If they need it, they have to be nationalized. It's really very simple. If they want, our money, they will have to give us seats on the board of directors. And if they want money that is such that exceeds half of the value of the company, they will have to give us a majority in the board of directors. We being the citizens. Really very simple. There are other companies like some airlines that say, I'm not sure whether that's true or not. They say that, look, we don't need state money. We can continue without it. But if we don't get any state money, we will fire half the workers. So, government, if you don't want us to fire half the workers, then you will have to support their wages. If you don't, fine, we'll just fire them. What do we do then? Then I think we need to be more nuanced. Then we have to attach strings to whatever assistance we give them. So you want assistance? Okay, first, they're going to have to be minimum wages and minimum working conditions. Secondly, you're going to have to reduce your emissions, greenhouse emissions. Third, those monies will be returned in proportion to your profits. Fourth, you're not going to give any bonuses to any directors. Fifth, you're not going to, pile up new debts on the company along the lines of private equity shenanigans. I think that would constitute a nice bailout, people's bailout package, together with what we have already proposed for the, for crediting citizens' bank accounts.
Thank you, Yanis. I saw a lot of people taking a lot of notes, which is good. Thank you for your time. Best of luck on television. Give them hell, comrade.
It's really horrible stuff. Okay.
Take care. And we go to Rosita, and I think it might be the last of our interventions for the evening, and then we will wrap up. So, Rosita.
I just want to say that a lot of politicians and journalists are on Twitter, and a lot of political parties spend a lot of money to be on Twitter and to give a lot of advertising and everything else to and it's up to us to go in discussions with those journalists and with those politicians. It's good because other people see our opinion and maybe they understand better what DiEM is.
Money, the one thing we don't have and desperately need. Any ideas about money are also very much welcome for this grassroots movement. Is there anybody else, because we do have 6 minutes, is there anybody else who'd like some closing words? Yeah, Rosita.
What I see of other political parties, and certainly in France, I don't know if it's the same in Wallonia or in other countries, but a lot of political parties are struggling these times with internal struggle, because all the people of those parties want to participate with the top, and it's strike me that so much political parties are struggling right now with their own members.
It's true. It's true. It's a period of flux. The UK Labour Party knows that better than most, but it is definitely a European, if not a global, I would say, phenomenon. Part of what we also said about social democrats, and it's Gramsci's definition of crisis. When the old is dying and the new one is not yet born. We are in that transitional period where things are still falling into place. And people are trying to find their place within this shifting reality, which is why it's such an exciting time to be part of DiEM and to be part of a project like DiEM. So this is not the end, this is the beginning, but it is the end of the Beyond the Balconies call. So thank you very much to all of you who have been watching us. Thank you to everyone from Belgium, the Netherlands and Luxembourg who were with us for this discussion. Looking very much forward to the result that will come out of these ideas that we had here together today. Let's just promise that the next time people hear from our countries, again, it will be because we have kickstarted all these beautiful, exciting new projects that they can all get involved in. So thank you very much again for your time. And as always, Carpe Diem.
Carpe Diem. Hello.